welcome to the garden. Today I bring you 4 things that you can compost and 4 that you can't. We'll start with 4 things that you can't compost because the list is surprisingly small. One thing I always like to avoid is salt, and that includes things like pickle juice and olives. They're just too salty to add to the compost. Salt can be very damaging to our plants. And one exception are Epsom salts, which can add magnesium and sulfur into the garden. Next up, we have a kind of obvious one, and that's chemicals. Anything like bleach is going to kill the beneficial bacteria, but also things like wood that's been stained or painted. Wood can actually be a great carbon source for your compost, but anything that's been painted, stained, or treated in any way, I completely avoid. There is actually one very interesting and notable exception, and that's ammonia. Ammonia is a very common household cleaner, especially for glass cleaners. But another use for ammonia is as a fertilizer. Farmers will spray it on their fields as a source of nitrogen. Next up, we have plastics, like plastic wrap for your foods. And plastic isn't as toxic as salt or chemicals, but it doesn't break down and benefit the compost. One exception here is if you have any produce in the fridge that's been wrapped in plastic and has gone bad. It can be really gross trying to fiddle with it, so I'll just throw the whole thing in the compost pile. The worms and the insects and beneficial bacteria will take care of the food, and later on we can just pick out that old plastic wrap. And that includes the little stickers on fruits and vegetables. And the last thing on our list of things I do not compost are metals, especially things like aluminum foil. The exception here is that iron can actually be added to the compost to provide some nutrients. And the rustier, the better. And again, we don't want to have anything that's been painted. We're just looking for old, rusty iron. And you can tell you have iron by using a magnet. Iron is magnetic, whereas aluminum is not. Now for the fun part, all the things that you can compost. And the list is essentially endless. Pretty much anything that's not salt, chemicals, plastic, or metal can be composted. Starting with meat, cheese, and bones, these are all things most people say you cannot compost. But in moderation, you absolutely can. And bones can actually be a great source of phosphorus, which is a pretty rare nutrient. I would never compost anything fresh, like cheese or meat, but if it's gone bad, you can chop it up into small bits and add it to your compost. You don't want to add massive quantities of this because there are some negatives. As they decompose, they can really smell. And that can attract predators and scavengers, and there is a risk of harmful bacteria spreading. But if you have a hot compost pile, they'll essentially be cooked off. Next on our list, we have dust from the vacuum and lint from the dryer. And these are mostly just hair and dust, which is just dead skin cells. Occasionally, we'll get a little piece of the carpet, and most carpets are made of plastic, whether it's nylon or polyester. So I do pick these out when I see them. And there are also polyester fabrics, but if you have a lot of nylon and polyester clothes, you might want to avoid the dryer lint. And we're just saving these from going into the trash, which is actually our number 3. And I have 3 trash bins in the house. An actual trash bin, which is mostly just plastic wrappers. I have what I call a dry compost bin. And in here we have leaves from the indoor garden. I have tissues, which are essentially just paper products. Things like hair clippings from getting a haircut, fingernail clippings, that sort of stuff. And then we have our wet compost bin in the kitchen. And this has all of our food scraps. And just look at all that material we're saving from going into the trash and ending up in a landfill. This bin single-handedly reduces our amount of trash by half at least. And we never have to empty the trash bin when it's half full because it's starting to smell. All that old food ends up in the compost and adds nutrients back into the garden. And the last thing on our list today are waste products like urine and manure. And yeah, I know, it's kind of gross, But urine's actually quite sterile and has a great source of nitrogen. Your body takes ammonia out of the food that you eat, turns it into urea, which you then expel. That breaks down back into ammonia, which then gets oxidized by beneficial bacteria into nitrites, and then those get broken down further into nitrates, which can then be used directly by your plants. I wouldn't just go using your garden as a bathroom, but the compost pile is a great way to recycle those nutrients. That also adds plenty of moisture, which is essential for any compost pile. Manure can also be added to the compost and needs to decompose and break down before we add it to the garden. It's best to use manure from animals like chickens, horse, cattle. But you can even compost human waste. But just like composting meat, cheese, and bones, there are some risks involved. So I generally avoid that. And any of these we want to add alongside our normal compost routine of food scraps and carbon-rich material. My favorite carbon source is dried leaves because they're readily available for me, but you can also use sawdust or even cardboard and newspaper. Just like painted or treated wood, I don't add any paper material that's been painted or laminated. I just want that raw paper. And that goes for wood ash as well, which I actually don't use in the compost because of the heavy metals, but I do use it on the flowers. And those are my picks for 4 things that you can compost and 4 things that you can't. If you enjoyed the video, let me know in the comments or with a thumbs up. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.